Hello and thank you. This is Andrew Kallman, and today I'm here with you with Robert, and we're going to take you through the four lenses of transformation. And so this is video 3 for the Flow Certified Coach online training for 2020, and this is the first tile of the 18 tiles. So I'm going to go to the next slide and turn it over to Robert and let him introduce himself. And it's over to you.
All
Thanks,
right. Well,
Robert.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to give back to the community and have an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about how impactful and important these topics can be in organizations. For everybody out there, my name is Robert Heath Sr. I am a Flow certified coach, and I'm also the CEO of Legacy Leadership Consulting. We help leaders to get the best out of themselves and out of their teams on every project. And we go in and do a lot of work. I'm a certified Scrum Master. I've also done some work in Lean Six Sigma. And I go into corporations and companies really helping their organizations to get better productivity out of their teams, but more importantly, and this will tie in a lot of what we're talking about today, I help them to change the mindsets of their teams so that they can actually maximize the tools that are out there and the skill sets that are out there. You know, as Andrew talked a lot in the last slides about the tool set versus mindset concept, it's so important that we recognize that, you know, a hammer is just a hammer, but in the hand of a carpenter, a hammer can build a house. And we have to understand that it's about the mindset that we're able to get the exponential gains that come to us from flow. And so that's really what my focus is with my company, and one of the reasons why I love flow as a methodology, and I love in the book, as you call it, as a agnostic methodology or a methodology agnostic rather. I love
Exactly.
that description.
Awesome. Whoops. Hold on. There we go.
All right. And so one of the big things that we want to talk about, and for you all leaders and the leadership takeaways, is to understand that everybody in the organization sees the organization through one of the four lenses, right? You have the individual, which is, you know, self-explanatory. It's the smallest component of an organization, the person who's going out and doing individual work that then gets compiled to the whole. And then you build from individuals, you build teams, right? And I'm a former Marine Corps officer, so this is the way that we talk all the time, right? You have the individual rifleman, then you've got the fire team, then you've got the squad, then you've got the platoon, and then you've got the company, right? And that's kind of the building blocks of an organization. And so that's how we build, and we look at things from these different lenses. What is your individual lens? What is your team lens? And then we look at our product lens, right? What is the program? What is the process? What is the structure? What is the system that we are dealing with, which is a system that impacts how people do their work. So how teams and individuals actually accomplish the work. And then lastly, we've got the organizational lens, which really is looking at our portfolio. It's our C-suite. What we call this, you know, again, in Marine speak, this is our operational and strategic level of thinking. Whereas, you know, your product and your individual and your team are really looking at your tactical level of thinking, right? And so when you're looking from that larger overall view with the organization, what you're really trying to talk about is how does this fit into the broader narrative of what the organization is doing? How does this move the ball forward? How does this move the vision forward? And that's one of the big things that's going to be so important as you all move throughout what we're going to be talking about through this training course, is how important vision is. And this goes to the U that you saw in the tile that was unifying each
Mhm.
one of the four lenses. It's a unified vision framework. The whole idea is that, again, an organization is all built up in each of those four areas. You see that there are people involved, and when you can have people all moving towards the same objective, all rowing in the same direction, you get exponential growth potential, and ultimately you're able to do things so much better. You know, the Gallup just put out a poll that talked about, you know, when you have engaged employees, firms that have above average engagement from the employees return earnings of upwards of 148%
Wow.
year over year against their competitors. That's the power of having a unified vision, having everybody rowing in the same direction. And the key thing is that this is built with people, teams, products, and organizations. That's the way we make it happen. We make every person in the organization able to be their best and move towards the same vision, towards the same goal. And so as we go forward, want you to pay attention to the fact that mindset and tool set and scaling are related, but they're not the same thing. Again, we talked a little bit about how tool set and scaling are really focused on the what, right? What are we doing, and how are we doing it? Whereas mindset is really focused on why are we doing it, and how can we be the best that we can be at doing it. And so that's what we really want to focus on when we talk about the four lenses. And so, again, getting here, we've got the four lenses that we see. We've got the individual in the upper left-hand corner, and that's really our building block. That's where we start. And then we move down to the, in the bottom left-hand corner, we move to that team, which scales, right? Scales up the individuals. And then you move over to the product, right? Which is what the team is going to be working on. What is the purpose of the team? Why is it that, right? The product generally dictates that we need more than just an individual doing something. It requires the team. And that product offering, or that product or process or structure, is built from the organizational focus, it's built from the organizational vision. All of the strategic vision and everything that we're trying to do in the organization comes from the top, and it cascades down the organization, and that then drives what we do in each of those four lenses for the and that's the reason why we need to transform each of those areas to make sure that we recognize the intersectionality of each area and how each area affects the others. Right? And so that is the whole concept of the unified vision framework, right? It unifies each of those organizations so that you don't have the organization going in one direction and the individual going in another direction and the team going in another direction and the product owner or the product manager or the program manager going in a completely separate direction, right? And we'll talk about this more in depth in the training when we get to, the flow process. But the key thing that you want to pay attention to is that flow equals success. And we get there by having a vision plus the right people, right? And this is kind of Jim Collins' idea of the right butts in the right seats on the bus, right? And then finally, the 4D model that you're going to incorporate. And you're going to learn more about the 4D model in depth and how powerful of an engine it is, how powerful of a catalyst it is to get the right people with the right vision to get into flow and making exponential gains in their productivity, in their profitability, and ultimately in their ability to transform their organization and turn that vision into reality.
One thing that I was going to jump in here, because this is absolutely perfect what you're sharing. On right people, sometimes people think, oh, I need to have the stars. And what's interesting is I saw recently the Swedish football, so that's soccer for everybody in America. The Swedish national team has a star on it called Zlatan. And they were performing not up to scale. People weren't stepping into individual states of flow. And then a year later, Zlatan was either injured or he couldn't be with for whatever reason. And a team with no defined superstar on the team, just a team of competent performers, they got themselves into the World Cup.
Exactly.
And so I'm just like, oh, that's beautiful. So right people, and Collins talks about getting the right people on the bus and the right people off the bus. But it's like, okay, you can hand us a team of people that from an organizational viewpoint, they might be identified as people who are like, oh, well, these are the people that are available. We can still take a team like that and still take them right through the transformation and get them to that level. So that's what's really cool.
Right. And I love the fact that you point that out, because I think that so often what people think is that there is this magical person that is walking around that is just going to do everything right. And the interesting thing about that, and I talk about this in a lot of the companies that I go into, I kind of disabuse them of this notion, because what people have to realize is when you pay somebody a salary, you need to understand the kind of business. My bachelor's degree, my background is in economics, right? So there's the whole concept of supply and demand and where the pricing curve comes in. And basically, when you're paying people a salary, you're paying them to not get fired. That is what the salary gets you. It gets you someone who is competent enough to not get fired. And the way that you know that that's what the salary gets you is because you'll pay everybody that's competent enough to not get fired about the same salary. And so if you've got a super producer and they're getting paid the same as the person that's not getting fired, they recognize that. And what winds up happening is that their production then reverts to the mean. right?
Yeah,
And they come back
exactly.
to where the level is to not get fired. What's the difference, right? And it's not business, it's not economical for us to pay people exactly what they're worth, because the whole concept is we're trying to figure out how to pay them enough to keep them, but still make more money off of what
Yep,
they do. Otherwise, we're running, a nonprofit or a charity, and we're not running a business. And so it
exactly.
makes perfect sense. But what's the difference between that gap of their excellence versus competency? And the difference between that gap is leadership. It's flow, it's transformation, it's mindset. And that's kind of the concept that we're looking at here.
Yeah.
And to take to take an example from across the pond on our side, right? The New England Patriots have won 6 out of the last 9 Super Bowls that they have been in. But just
Cool.
think about that for a second. In the last 20 years, they've been in 9 of those Super Bowls, which is crazy. One team out of 32 has been in half of the Super Bowls, almost half of the Super Bowls that have
Amazing.
happened in the last 2 decades. And oh, by the way, their quarterback, who is now considered to be one of the greatest of all time, was the 199th pick in the draft,
Wow.
labeled Mr. Irrelevant, because he was the last pick in the draft. That's the title that person gets. So understanding systems and the fact that Bill Belichick in that New England system has very rarely ever had a superstar player. He's had top tier caliber players, but
Yep.
never someone who was the best in the league. Never. There was one year that they went 19-0 and they lost in the Super Bowl. That was when they had Randy Moss, who was arguably the
Ah,
best wide receiver in the league at that time, one of the best wide receivers in history.
okay.
Yeah, so I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Beautiful.
The idea that if you can change mindset, you can get people to perform. I
Yeah.
like to say you get to punch above their weight, and that is the goal. That is what we bring to the
Yeah.
table when we really implement flow, and when we implement this unified vision framework. It allows people to do more than they would otherwise be able to do on their own.
Spot on. That's perfect.
Awesome. And so this gets us kind of the concept of tool set, right? And these are all of the tools that are out there. When you're thinking about Lean Six Sigma, when you're thinking about Agile, when you're thinking about Scrum, when you're thinking about all of the different ways that we figure out Kanban and the tools that we use to improve productivity, right? They generally focus on either A, the individual and helping them to problem
Hmm.
solve better, or helping them to think differently about the way that
Yep.
they do the work, or B, they focus on the product level at the systems level, right? How do we negotiate? How do we communicate? How do we reduce the amount of communicative connections so that we can make it more expedient for us to get communication back and forth around the organization? These are the tool set and the mindset things. And the key about this is what most people don't understand is these can give you gigantic gains in your
Yes.
organization. That's the one thing that's important to note here. The reason why there's such a big industry for these areas is because they work.
Hmm. Yep.
The issue is just when you try to scale, when you try to make it bigger, when you try to make it better, and I've had this experience, and Andrew, I'm sure you've had this experience as well. I can go into an organization and implement these tools and these methods, and we can get dramatic results immediately. But
Yeah.
the issue is what happens when I leave, right? And that's the most
Exactly.
important thing. And so mindset and transformation from an organizational level ensures that not only does your tool set and your methods impact the organization, but it ensures that the people in the organization are now able at every level, in the organizational level, in the product level, in the team level, and the individual level. We make sure that everybody is able to utilize the tools and the methods in order to do their jobs better. That's where you get your exponential growth, right? And so when we
Yeah.
look at mindset and transformation, it includes the majority of all 4 areas, right? You got the roles, the portfolio manager, the senior
Hmm.
executives, and the management and the C-suite. We start talking about how to make sure that their vision cascades all the way down the organization and that everybody can be focused on that, right? You look at the product area. This is also talking about like your programs, your processes. What are the things that you're using to communicate? What are the software as a service systems that you're using? What are the things that you're doing in the organization that are either making it easier or harder for you all to do the work that you need to do? And that's why mindset is so
Exactly.
important, because it touches everything and it gives an exponential catalytic boost to everything that you're doing.
That is spot on.
Good to go. Good to go. And so we wanted to talk about the last kind of object that we want to talk about with regard to this is the scaling program, scaling agile. And when we look at scaling agile, you've got, if you can see in the upper right hand corner, you've got a couple of examples. We've got less as large scale Scrum, and then we've also got scaling agile or safe in the bottom right? And the basic idea about that is these are great tools and they work. But the issue that we run into with them is the fact that they're generally product centric and they're team centric. They touch a little bit on the individual. And here's the issue. If you have an organization and you have individuals who don't have the proper mindset in order to use these, then you wind up scaling sometimes the wrong things. And what happens is you just create bigger problems that have a bigger opportunity or a bigger impact on the organization writ large, right? There's so many times. I remember I had one client of mine where he went and we were working on improving his onboarding program and improving turnover and all the rest of this. And because he was having good results in the beginning, he went and then decided to take on a whole bunch of work that just exacerbated the other parts of the system that were
Yeah.
still not fixed, that were on our plan to fix, but he jumped the gun and went a little bit earlier. And then he wound up with a whole other headache that, and we were meeting once a week. So I didn't have the ability to kind of pull him back and say, no, don't do that. And so he learned from the experience, and now we've moved a little bit more methodically. But that's one of the problems with scaling too quickly or scaling too fast. When you haven't touched every part of the organization, you can actually make smaller problems larger problems very quickly.
I love that because it echoes one of the signers of the Agile Manifesto. His comment was, they asked him, well, when should we scale? And his comment was, well, scaling is the last thing you should do.
Exactly.
And you can
Exactly.
interpret that a couple different ways, like never do it, or it's literally the last thing you should
Right.
do.
Right. It's kind of like you'll know when you're there.
Yeah. Well, and almost all of these scaled methodologies are predicated on teams that are successfully doing agile.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so because of that, it's really important to be able to uh, scale it up. Those teams have to be well functioning. Does every team have
Exactly.
to do it perfectly? No.
Mm-mm.
Uh, but you need enough teams that are performing well enough to drag the other teams with. It's the same idea.
Exactly. And that way you can
Yeah.
swap people out and you can cross
Yeah.
teach and do and all those types of things. And what really is problematic with trying to scale too fast is that generally we try to scale too fast because we're trying to get there because we're thinking that that's the panacea that's going to fix all the problems that we've dealt with. But the key is, it's an old song from the from the 90s, more money, more problems, right? Like at the end of the day, as you get bigger and as you grow, it doesn't shrink the amount of stuff that you have to deal with. It just magnifies all of
Exactly.
the gaps and the holes that you may have in your system.
Exactly. So spot on.
Yeah. And so that's the big key that we want to focus on is making sure that whether we're talking about scaling, whether we're talking about tools and mindset, transformation is the key. It must occur in all four areas at the same time in order for the organization to be successful, right? And scaling agile tool sets and achieving an agile mindset is the goal. You want to do both and not
Yeah.
either or.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things that you want to focus on. And flow is a framework that allows you to do that because again, it's not based on any particular tool set or skill set. It's a mindset shift and then a unified vision framework that allows you to use whatever tool set, whatever skill set that you're putting together to make organizational transformation. And what really kind of drives that is the understanding. And if you see over to the right, we've got the VSPT diagram. This is a diagram that, and this original concept that was pioneered at West Point, the
Mhm.
military academy for the United States Army. And the basic idea when it originated was vision, strategy, projects, and tasks. And what has happened over time is that because of the fact, as we talked about, when we're dealing with organizations, we understand that organizations are composed of people. It is a people business, right? And that's why we focus so much on leadership because leadership is about people, right? Jack Welch once said it this way: an employee or just a regular kind of basic employee, your job is the task. Your job is to take care of the work at hand. But when you move into leadership, your job now becomes the people. Your job is to make sure that the people are able to do their job, to
Yeah.
focus on the task in the easiest way, in the most efficient way, in the most effective way possible. And so one of the things that we want to focus on here is as you look at your vision and your strategy, that is the part that is done and focused on by leadership, and it must be cascaded down and translated properly to the people so that they can accomplish the tasks. And that's why making sure that the language of management is spoken as well as the language of the task masters and the language of leadership, right? You've got to make sure that you're able to do both because here's the key. We manage things, we lead people.
Spot
And
on.
so many people focus on that and feel like we need to manage people, and it's not the case. We manage things, we manage strategy, we manage, inventory, we manage our vision and all those different types of things. We manage our communication devices and structures and processes, but we lead people in the direction of the vision,
Yes.
in the direction of the strategy.
Absolutely spot on. That's perfect.
Awesome. All right, and so that kind of brings us to our last kind of slide in this section, which talks about the difference between the scaling methods and the transformative methods, and looking at it kind of from a real world example. So I've been in a number of different, worked with a number of different PMOs in my time with the companies that I've worked with, and generally the PMOs will bring us in as consultants in order to teach them scaling methods, to teach them a particular tool set, to get them in and to help them with big room strategic planning, to do workshops on how to prioritize and what should go first and when we should
Yeah.
do things, right? We do a lot of Kaizen events. We do a lot of,
Hmm.
I'm a certified Scrum Master as well. So you get in there and you try to help people figure out what should go when and how it should go. But here's the problem with when a PMO office brings, especially when it brings consultants like myself in. When we come in, we're really good at what we do. We can go and get gains for the organization really
Hmm.
easily. And
Yeah.
what happens is we teach them the tools, we show them the tools, they understand it intellectually, but when we leave, are they able to actually implement what we've done?
No.
And the answer is no, it crashes, right? And this is one of the things that has been so frustrating for me, because I come to this world from, I was a teacher, and then I went to law school and became a Marine Corps officer, and leadership and teaching and helping people grow. I was a basketball coach. I did a number of different things, but my life has always been about not just giving people information, but helping people to actually use that information, right? I was a Spanish teacher when I was a
Yeah.
school teacher, and my whole thing was I didn't want my students to only know how to do the stuff when they were in my classroom. I wanted them to come back to me 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, and still remember how to speak Spanish. And that required transformation. It didn't just require information. And a lot of our scaling methods are focused on information and us doing the work. So when you move to transformation, what a lot of organizations are starting to recognize is they're not able to get the biggest bang for their buck when they just bring in the consultants to do the work, right? Because at the end of the day, that's not a long term, it doesn't satisfy the long term investment. But when
Yeah.
you transform your team, when you focus on mindset and training, and specifically when you train people directly before they implement what it is you're teaching them, and you give them coaching and mentoring during that process so that they're able to make the gains and then cement those gains, right, with a transformed behavior and a transformed mindset, what you get is an organization that can now employ the scaling methods over and over and over and over again. And now you've transformed your organization into a lean organization, into an agile organization, into an organization that can operate in flow.
Yeah. Spot on.
Right. And so for many of you all, this diagram will probably make your heads want to explode, but this is just intentionally set out for you to give you an idea of how complex the things are that we're talking about. As you can see, there's a ton of different connections. And, if you look down at the bottom, you can see that you've got your initiate, your discover, your deliver, and your release segments. So those of you all have been through PMI trainings and everything, you'll see that something that you definitely like. But one of the reasons that we have this in here, and it's a good read if you go over to the link to read the article, but one of the main reasons why we have this on here is just to illustrate, kind of give you a visual. A picture's worth 1,000 words of how complex what it is that we're talking about is, right? How complex the transformation and the work that it takes to scale up an organization, how difficult it is, right? How complex it is. And one of the things that we want to focus on is when you have something that's complex, right? That's complicated, that's chaos. We want to make it more simple. We want to make it easier. That's our goal, and that's what the concept of the unified vision framework and the concept of flow is all about, is making things a lot more simple. But I want you to pay attention to something, and this is the key to how we make it simple. As you can see in the top right-hand corner of this drawing by Deloitte, you see that leadership, right, over here in the upper right-hand corner, is really divorced from the process. And this is one of the major problems that we see as we go out. Leadership is set aside as if it is not integral to what we're doing. But what we talked about already, remember, every step along this way is a person doing something. And therefore, leadership is something that needs to be not in the upper right-hand corner, divorced from the process, but rather superimposed, overlaid over the entire process. And the better you are at having your organization incorporate leadership into everything that you do, incorporate the vision framework into everything you do, then you will make every transaction more valuable. You will make every transaction have a better return on investment in your organization. And that's really the point that we want to drive home with this training.
There we go.
There we go. So just to recap, what we've covered in this tile in this training is the 4 lenses of transformation are based on the 4 segments of the organization. You've got the individual, the team, the product, where we talk about the program or the process or line management structures and systems, right? And then you've got the organization, the portfolio, the C-suite, and those persons that are there. We want to make sure that when we're looking at the 4 lenses, that we're not looking at them and breaking them out into their component parts, but instead looking at them through a unified vision framework, right? The whole concept of the individual plus the team plus the organization plus the process. And that allows us to build better things more effectively, more efficiently, under budget, on time, and to get the biggest bang for our buck. And the key concept with that is that mindset must happen at the same time as tool set, skill set, and scaling. They're not separate. It's not an either or. It's a both and proposition. All right. So ultimately, as you all finish up, the one thing that I want you to kind of take away from this talk is that the 4 lenses is a fast way for you to sort where are our problems coming from. What are the things that we're dealing with, and where do we see them? Are they at the individual level? Are we not having enough? Do we not have enough clarity of the vision from the organizational level? Are our systems or our processes where we're really struggling and where we're really seeing a lot of the things that are holding us up? Or is it at the team level? Do we have just dysfunctional teams, or do we have teams that are not really well balanced and in cross disciplinary function? Those are the things that allow you to quickly sort where your problems are coming from, so that you can then apply your mindset and then your skill set and tool set, tools and methodologies to that area as quickly as possible.
Yep.
And then finally, the flow formula applies to all 4 lenses. It's not an either or, it's not a one or this, right? You can do it everywhere that you are focusing in on in your organization, and you can do it all at the same time. You can train management, and you can train your teams, and you can train your organizational C-suite and portfolio managers, et cetera. And that's the whole thing, because ultimately, and this is the bullet that you see at the bottom, if you don't successfully transform your mindset, then you will never get the full value of your investment in the tools that in the tool set and the scaling that you want, right? So many organizations try to get this transformation without actually focusing on it. They think that the tool set and the scaling are going to miraculously turn them into something different, and that's not the case. But if you change your mindset, you can use the tool set, and even if you don't use the tool set immaculately, even if you don't do it perfectly, you will get exponential results. And that's the beauty of mindset and transformation.
Thanks, Robert. That was just excellent. Thank
Well,
you
thank
very
you.
much. I look forward to doing the other video with you here in the coming days. And we're going to end this session here. And so I'm going to hit the stop recording, and we'll see you all in the next video. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.